Darvin Ham goes all the way in on the Lakers for firing him. Would Zach LaVine rocket Houston to the top of the standings? And the Knicks and Wolves face off for the first time in the regular season post Karl-Anthony Towns Randle swap. Who will have the upper hand? I'll ask Matt and Hayes. That's all today on Locked On NBA.
You are Locked On NBA, your daily NBA podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On NBA. Thanks for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, and that includes on YouTube, where you can see our bright, shining faces. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. I'm Doug Branson, host of the Locked On Hornets podcast, and your Shot Clock Sherpa, guiding you through the NBA's biggest stories every day with the help of Locked On's local experts. And with me are two of Locked On's premier national NBA experts from the Locked On Nuggets podcast and senior NBA writer for the Action Network. It's Matt Moore, and from the Locked On Bulls podcast, we've got Hayes. Matt, Hayes, basketball resumes tonight, thankfully, after taking a night off, everyone getting a night off. And one of the matchups to watch is going to be Knicks and Wolves. The Knicks visiting Minnesota. It's the first time in the regular season that the two will face off since a trade that sent Karl-Anthony Towns to New York and Julius Randle to Minnesota. Both teams have faced issues dealing with the new roster construction. The Knicks have struggled defensively and on the boards. The Wolves with their offensive chemistry. So my opening question here, we'll start with you, Matt. Whose issues are going to be harder to solve, New York or Minnesota?
The Wolves, no question. I was kind of digging in on some stuff this morning, and it looks like the Knicks are going to be fine. A lot of their numbers in terms of the defense, it's very lineup dependent, and you can kind of tweak those and improve the performance. It's a little less stable, I think, than some of the Wolves' problems. Now, look, the Wolves have been great, too. Like, these two teams are probably good enough to make playoff runs, and then you see what happens. But I think with the Wolves, when you really kind of dive into it, one of the things that's interesting is they're fine when Julius Randle's on the court with Rudy Gobert. They're fine when Julius Randle's on the court with Anthony Edwards. It's when you put those guys together with Jaden McDaniels that the offense absolutely drops off a cliff. So they're going to have to make a decision about one of those guys. It's okay if you keep Julius, if you add a different wing. It's okay if you move Randle and keep Jaden McDaniels, but I don't think you can play both of them together. Hayes, for me, the Wolves have got more to figure out here.
I agree with you. The Wolves definitely have more to figure out. I look at the Knicks and I say that this is a Knicks team that I think could go deeper in the playoffs than I would trust Minnesota to go right now. And that mainly is because of the fit on the roster. I think Julius Randle, adding him in, they started figuring it out per the numbers you just gave. But I still think long term, I don't see Julius Randle staying there. I don't think that they want him to stay there either. That's just my own personal opinion. I'm not basing that on anything I've heard. And so I think the Minnesota Timberwolves have a lot more to figure out to compete in the Western Conference than the New York Knicks do to compete in the Eastern Conference.
And the Wolves generally fully healthy, and you've got this piece in Mitchell Robinson that the Knicks still have in their back pocket, waiting for him to get healthy again. How does that affect things? We're going to talk about that in a moment. But the Minnesota Timberwolves, they may have some longer-term issues, but short-term, they've been really good. They're turning things around. They've won 6 out of their last 7 games. And it's been on the back of some incredible defense. Locked On Knicks and Locked On Wolves got together for a crossover episode to preview this matchup. And Ben Beacon tells you what's behind the T-Wolves getting back to the D-Wolves.
They're allowing 99 points per 100 possessions, which, of course, is an absurd number. I think they led the league last year. It was something like 106. They're 4 points better than the Thunder even over the last 10 games, like 7 points better than the Rockets. That is just an absurdly high level. What's clicking for Minnesota defensively?
Early this season, the Wolves were playing like they were too cool for school. Like, we got to the conference finals. We can roll the ball out and play. We'll be all right. And it was enough. They lost consecutive games to the Blazers, and they were 10-11, I think, at one point. And the scheme never really changed. It was kind of the same thing. I mean, the biggest difference is in the non-Gobert minutes. They were really struggling. The low man help's been a lot better. That's kind of something that was really bad early in the season was Rudy would get caught in no man's land in a drop, and the low man wouldn't rotate. And if he did, then the next rotation was late. They wouldn't X out to the corner, and you'd give up a corner three or you'd give up a dunk. And it's defense 101. Now over the last 7, it sounds like just too easy of an answer, but they're legit just playing harder.
Okay, so playing harder on defense, it seems like they've got the swagger back that they had last year on defense, but on offense, it's been much more of a struggle for Minnesota. And also in that crossover episode, they had a little bit of a swagger discussion from Karl-Anthony Towns growing up, maturing, finding his swagger and delivering that to New York. And Julius Randle, I think one of the hosts from Locked On Knicks said that Minnesota may need to consider hiring a body language expert because Julius Randle having issues there, shrugging his shoulders, looking disinterested sometimes. Is there anything to that, Matt, the body language issues with Minnesota versus what you're seeing in New York?
I think it's funny that people kind of this argument, we have this a lot about body language, and there's some there like, you should just completely, you don't know anything. You can't read anything into that. And it's like, look, we're human beings. If you're in the room with somebody and they look disinterested, they look upset, they look downhearted, you're going to notice it. Like that doesn't, but the key is that you can't know what it's about. That's like the trick here is like, yeah, Julius Randle might look this way. That doesn't mean that means that he hates playing with Rudy Gobert or Anthony Edwards, or he's upset about what's going on with the game. It may just be like, hey, his life's not great right now. He never asked to be traded to Minnesota. Like when players are out of their control, that's really bothersome to them the way it is to us. Like whenever something happens in your life that's out of your control, that's disruptive. And so I think that that's real, that you need to pay attention to body language. You just can't make assumptions about why that body language is what it is.
That's an amazing statement there. Because yeah, you're right. Like we don't know what the thing is behind it, but I think it would be, you can't just ignore what you're seeing. There is something going on there with Julius Randle, and whether it is, something in his personal life, whether it is some things going on or them just not having the success that maybe that they want to have as a team, not that they're having a terrible season, but that maybe it's just not the success that they expected or that they hoped for. There's a lot going into that, but I think you can't just ignore the body language aspect of it because it is noticeable. And if you pay attention to Julius Randle and you look at him compared to like a couple of years ago in New York, you can tell the difference there.
All right, so I mentioned the Knicks have had some issues as well integrating Karl-Anthony Towns into the lineup. They've had some issues on defense and rebounding that really haven't been so much on Karl-Anthony Towns, but they've been missing Mitchell Robinson, and he will return off the injured list at some point. And Locked On Knicks discussed if a Robinson-Cat front court could vault the Knicks into title contention. Let's listen to that.
Rebounding issues that have plagued them, like I think specifically that Atlanta game, would sort of be out the window. And they would be a dominant rebounding team. I mean, you're talking about putting three of the best rebounders at their respective positions and Mitch, Cat, and Hart on the floor.
If you have a Mitch out there, suddenly you can start playing more like, the 2022 to 23 Knicks, or even last year's Knicks when Mitch was healthy. And Hartenstein did some of this too, where your offensive rebounding just makes up for any misses that you have. And you're able to still put out a top offense even on nights where you shoot like 30% from three.
There's a lot of reasons to do it. I think I just worry you lose what makes this team great. Might be worth it with how inconsistent they've been so far.
Hayes, what are some other roster tweaks you think the team should look at that would put them in line to compete for a title in the summer?
I mean, of course, the Lakers with some more three-point shooting and some defense. I think that would help the Lakers considerably if they want to really make a run. I think they're missing that. I think when you look at the Denver Nuggets, they can use some more shooting as well. Shamelessly trying to plug Zach LaVine to go there. It is what it is there. And then one thing that I think too, that makes them title contenders or anything, but look out for the Detroit Pistons, because if they do make a trade here to get a little bit more firepower and help for Cade Cunningham, not that, like I said, it doesn't make them necessarily contenders in the East, but I do think that they can go from a team right outside the play-in, I believe they are now, to well in that play-in with the way that they've been playing at times this season.
Yeah, I'll go with the Spurs here. If you look at the numbers, if you move Castle into the starting lineup for Jeremy Sohan, they have a plus 18.4 net rating. That's for a team that's 500 and has a less than 0 net rating. Like, that's a crazy swing. That's how good Stephon Castle makes the rest of that team. When you put him next to Chris Paul and Wembanyama, good things happen. So I think the Spurs are slow playing this. It's time to get over that. They did this last year where they were playing Wemby at 4, and they finally moved him to 5, and it's like, oh, look, they're good again. Same kind of deal here. The other thing is Denver should really look at cloning Jokic. Like, if they could just have 2 Nikola Jokic's so that one's on the floor at all times, they would be a lot better, because really – at this point, with as many iterations as this bench has completely sucked, I'm at the point of believing nothing fixes it unless you have two Jokic's. So really, they just need another. Now you can make a league rule. You can't have a clone on the floor at the same time as the original player. I think that's an important thing to cover in the CBA, Doug. But I do think that they should look into cloning.
And one will eventually have to eliminate the other because I think there's some sci-fi rules about that, like they can't both exist for too long. So yeah, there's some issues there presented by that, but nothing that a little CBA can't handle. And you mentioned Stephon Castle there. I saw something interesting that Castle right now leading the Rookie of the Year ladder, and it would be the first time since I think Minnesota in 2015-16 that a team would have back-to-back Rookie of the Years if Stephon Castle were to win Rookie of the Year. It hasn't happened very often, only once since like the 70s. So we'll see if Castle can maintain that momentum. Okay, coming up on the Locked On NBA podcast, Darvin Ham sets the record straight on his tumultuous time with LeBron James and the Los Angeles Lakers. But is he telling the whole story? I'll ask Matt and Hayes that next. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is sponsored by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments. With over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program, the possibilities are endless. Plus, you'll gain access to unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. If you're already paying rent, why not make it work for you? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. And make sure to use our link so that they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. The holidays are the perfect time to make memories, and there's no better way to bring people together than going to a live event. Whether it's a big game, a concert, or even a comedy show, Game Time makes it easier than ever to find great tickets at amazing prices. And with their new feature, Game Time Picks, you can skip the endless scrolling and get right to the best deals on incredible seats. It's all about saving you time and money while finding the perfect tickets. Plus, you can use the super deal option to score top-notch seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time also gives you features that make buying tickets stress-free, like all-in pricing, toggle that feature on, no surprise fees at checkout, and a panoramic seat view so you know exactly what your view is going to look like before you buy. And with the lowest price guarantee, you'll always get the best deal, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. More Locked On NBA ahead. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen every day. Your favorite NBA team has a free daily newsletter. Go to LockedOnDaily.com, subscribe, stay up to date with local expert analysis and amazing writing from Katie Heindel, Mike Shearer, and Locked On Fantasy Basketball tips from Josh Lloyd. Okay, we're going to talk about those Darvin Ham, very interesting comments that he had, honest comments that he had about his time with LA in just a moment. But first, I want to talk more about the early trade deadline rumors, a lot of them swirling around Zach LaVine. And part of that is because his play this season has turned that once dry trade market into a flourishing garden of opportunities. One team we haven't talked about so far, the Houston Rockets, who have consistently said they aren't interested in shaking up their roster at the deadline. But that hasn't stopped. Matt doesn't believe it. But that hasn't stopped Locked On Rockets host Jackson Gatlin from dreaming about a two-guard upgrade.
So far this season, Zach LaVine, relatively healthy, and he's actually putting up really, really solid numbers. He's shooting 50% from the floor right now, just under 43% from downtown. If Jalen Green was putting up Zach LaVine numbers right now as the starting two guard for the Rockets would be the number one team in the Western Conference, and it'd be one of the best teams they're still one of the best teams in the NBA, despite not having the consistent offensive production from Jalen Green. They'd be in the same conversation as the Oklahoma City Thunder, as the Dallas Mavericks, as the Cleveland Cavaliers, as the Boston Celtics. I am confident in making that claim. because that's been the Rockets' Achilles heel all season long. They have the defense. They have the ability to stop other teams. They're the number 2 defense in the entire NBA. Their biggest weakness has been their inability to generate consistent offense.
Okay, Matt, Jackson Gatlin is confident, but is it that simple? Would a LaVine and Houston pairing make sense for the Rockets, or would it risk disrupting the defensive chemistry that they've built their success on?
I think it makes a lot of sense. And in particular, this doesn't have to be quote unquote the move, right? Because as if you ask Hayes, and he's so desperate to move off of Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic as well, like you can probably get him. Like if you offer Jalen Green, young star, lot of scoring potential, lots of upside, and maybe 1 first rounder, like a heavily protected first, that's probably good enough for Chicago, given where they're going and where they're headed. And if you look at it, the Rockets defense is 10.8 points worse per 100 possessions with Jalen Green on the floor. And you go, well, Zach LaVine's a bad defender too. Zach LaVine was on a team that 2 seasons ago was a top 5 defense in the NBA. I'm not saying that's because of Zach. I'm saying you can cover for Zach. There's not evidence that you can cover for Jalen Green with this team. I think it makes a lot of sense. I would love to see that trade.
And I think also when you look at Zach LaVine defensively, at least this year, I don't know if it's because of all the talk and chatter around him for the last basically year, but he's a lot more engaged defensively now. And I think Zach LaVine realizes a lot of the knocks on him were warranted. Like, don't get me wrong, he's one of the most talented scorers when he's on in the NBA, probably top 12, 15 scorer in the NBA. But he's taken more of a willingness on the defensive side of the ball this season. There's times where he's called for the best perimeter assignment on defense in clutch moments for the Bulls, and it's like he's trying to prove something. And I do think going to a team, as much as people knock Zach LaVine, I think you got to look at the teams that Zach LaVine's been on. Outside of that little glimmer, when it was him, DeMar, Zoe, and Vooch, all healthy, he's been on teams that have been terrible the majority of his NBA career. You put him on a team full of these young guys in the Houston Rockets that are all motivated, playing well, and a coach like Ime Udoka, I think you'll probably see the best version of Zach LaVine. I think this makes a lot of sense for both sides, even taking away that the Bulls are my team. I think that they want young talent that they can take a look at and develop. They're also not necessarily trying to win the most games possible if they keep their top 10 pick that's owed to the Spurs this year. So I think if they were to make a deal, if the Rockets were truly willing to will and deal here, there's a deal to be made, and one that I think actually benefits both sides here.
Okay, what do you think about Matt's proposed deal? So Jalen Green and a heavily protected first round pick and whatever else would need to be done to make the math work. And for Zach LaVine, what do you think about that deal?
Absolutely. I think the Bulls would take that and run with it. I think the one thing about the Denver Nuggets trade that came out is that it made, because Michael Porter Jr. had to be included, it kind of gave a base of like, all right, this is the minimum now at this point. And Jalen Green makes a lot of sense. The Bulls want the most chances at picks because of how much they had to give up to build the last team that only won 1 playoff game. I think that proposed deal makes a lot of sense for the Bulls.
Of course, it's not going to work because they gave him that extension, and because if they gave him the extension, he can't be traded this year. So if you're going to do that kind of a deal, it would have to be some combination of the other guys, and that's where this runs into a problem, right? Because Houston's going to be like, you're not getting Amen Thompson, you're not getting Reed Shepard, you're not getting Jabari Smith, you're not getting whoever. So it's going to be like Dylan Brooks, and then that's where the Bulls are going to be like, no, like it's got to be somebody young. So like that's a complication. Once again, I don't know why Houston gave him that extension.
All right. Well, we will keep talking about this trade. Actually, before we move on from this, we've talked a ton about Jimmy Butler and Zach LaVine. Just very quickly, do you think both are moved, one is moved, or neither are moved? What's your prediction here, Matt?
Give me the guys again. Sorry.
Zach LaVine and Jimmy Butler.
Zach's moved. Both are moved. I think both wind up getting moved. I think Miami realizes that the jig is up.
Hayes?
I'm too pessimistic. I think neither are going to get moved. I think it's going to be a lot of fun conversation leading to the trade deadline, but I don't think either are going to get moved.
All right, coming up, we're going to talk about these Darvin Ham comments. Very interesting, honest thoughts, and we got some honest thoughts from Locked On Lakers about that situation as well. Plus, human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together, drones, mass hysteria. Matt and Hayes will tell you what ideas fans and teams have talked themselves into that have no basis in reality. Coming up. Today's episode of Locked On NBA is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com to join up today. You're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. More Locked On NBA ahead. Okay, back here on Locked On NBA. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. So after the Bucks won their NBA Cup title, Mark Spears got a chance to catch up with Bucks assistant Darvin Ham about his time with the Lakers, and Ham was unusually honest for the tight-knit coaching circle that is usually kept. Here's Locked On Lakers with a few of the comments and their thoughts.
Darvin was asked about his time with the Lakers, and he said, quote, "To do as well as I did, I swear to God, anywhere else, I'm probably looking at as an extension with what I did. I'm not talking about feelings. I'm talking about actual facts. They go from making it to the playoffs to the Final Four in the NBA, the conference finals, and then you win the in-season tournament, navigate through all the injuries, and win both your play-in games to get to the playoffs."
It's being reported like I'm just throwing some lineups out in the wall to see what sticks. No, man, we were really navigating a lot of guys from being hurt to having the oldest player in the league, meaning LeBron, to navigating AD's injury history. It was a lot. Some of the bleep that was coming out, wow, bro, I don't know X's and O's. I was winging it. Dude, that was the most disappointing stuff. What I think is interesting about this, though, Andy, is it is a start of a trend throughout his comments to Mark Spears, where Darvin is correct and leaves out important context.
Ultimately, the thing that led to Darvin, retaining Darvin being untenable was when there was the opportunity to get back to more of the combinations involving LeBron, AD, D'Lo, Reeves, Rui, Vando, i.e. the group that took you to the Western Conference Finals. That was the core. The reluctance to work with that group. This organization does not really know what it wants in a coach, because I don't think they think the role of a coach is all that important.
All right, there is a lot there between the comments, and definitely go, if you're interested in this topic, definitely go check out this episode of Locked On Lakers, because they really go deep into that subject, and it's very interesting. But my question to you, Hayes, fair or foul, Darvin Ham roasting the Lakers for firing him and still, struggling a little bit?
Absolutely fair. Like they made him the scapegoat of a lot of other problems that were going on over there, and that's one of the fears I had for JJ Redick going over there. Were the Lakers going to be patient enough to allow JJ Redick to develop as a coach that as need be? Like, was Darvin Ham a great coach? No, I'm not necessarily saying that, but I think he did a pretty darn good job for what he had there, and he was trying to figure it out as he went. And so, the Lakers, I love that the Kaminsky brothers pointed out that they don't really value coaching. One thing, though, that I do think is foul there, though, was Brian hiding from the Babadook in that video? Like, where was the light?
No, I think so. That was a breaking news pod or a bonus pod. And so, yes, it was a very dark environment there around Andy. And I think that was due to the fact, or around Brian. I think he was in his car.
Okay. Just hiding from the Blair Witch.
Well, that's dedication. That's a dedication that you only get on the Locked On Podcast Network.
Look, they scapegoated Russell Westbrook, and he's been fine since. They scapegoated Darvin Ham, and he's been a good assistant. They scapegoated Frank Vogel. He didn't work out in Phoenix because he got scapegoated there too. How does this work where, we don't really think coach is that important, but also it's your fault that we didn't succeed? How does that work? Like, this is the whole thing, is like, look, man, look at the roster. And the biggest problem, honestly, was that Western Conference Finals run, because that convinced everybody that they were good. That team was never good. They hit the right sequence. You were not winning a title. You were not contending for a title. And we've said this on the show before with D'Angelo Russell. Austin Reeves, probably not a starter on a championship team. Like, just be realistic with it. I don't blame Darvin one bit for lighting that organization up. If they were cruising and killing it this year because you got everything that you wanted. You got the X's and O's. I think what JJ's running is really good with LA. It doesn't matter. They're not good enough. Stop blaming other people for your problems, Rob Pelinka.
I don't blame Darvin either, and I think Locked On Lakers hit the nail on the head, which is that Darvin is both right, and yet that kind of doesn't matter because when you're dealing with irrationality, being right is not necessarily going to work in your favor.
What's killing me though is Lakers fans are like, well, I mean, sure, the results may say one thing, but it was the right decision because I didn't like. And it's just like you just want to be right. You just don't want to go back and admit, oh, maybe it wasn't Darvin. It's okay. We're all wrong sometimes. I thought Tony Snell was going to be better than Jimmy Butler. Mistakes were made. Like, it's fine. Just admit that maybe Darvin Ham wasn't the problem with the Lakers.
Okay, speaking of irrationality, craziness, I don't know if either of you have seen this coverage around drone sightings in the U.S. Northeast, but it has all kinds of people speculating about government cover-ups, military technology, surveillance, aliens. But skeptics say that what we're really witnessing is another in a long line of mass hysteria events, groupthink run amok, which got me curious about what Matt and Hayes think the NBA masses are being hysterical about, whether this be fans, pundits, team officials, league officials. What is something people are concerned about in the NBA where there's really no there? Matt, we'll start with you.
How about the three-point rate? Everyone's freaking out about this. Like, everyone's freaking out about the number of threes. Here's the reality, is that every time that there is an offensive adjustment or defensive adjustment, anytime that there is a tactical advantage developed in sports, there is always a reaction. For each action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. And you're going to see that with the three-pointers. Like, I've written a lot about this week. The key is going to be some teams are going to start defending entirely differently. You have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to start guarding the threes first before worrying about the rim. You have to understand that these rates of conversion are getting so high for some of these teams. You have to defend the three-point shot first. But teams will make those adjustments, and they will learn how to do this, and then we will see a regression back. Once those shots are no longer as efficient and as available as they are currently, you're going to see a regression. We don't need to change. We don't need to move the line back. We don't need to change the value. We don't need to we don't need to put a limit on the number of threes that a team can take. This is all ridiculous. Calm down. Defenses will figure this out. Just give them a chance.
That's what I was going to go for. I'll say the NBA ratings thing. I think that there's been a lot made of that. Don't get me wrong, there are some signs of concern there, but I think all these think pieces on it's the linking it back to the 3-point shot, or it's this or it's that. Like, yeah, NBA ratings need to improve, but I think overall, like, the league is going to be fine. The league is still making more money than what it ever has before. It's going to be fine overall. I've just seen a lot of conversations around the ratings thing, and just to be honest with you, a lot of basketball fans, you never even thought about NBA rating before until it started getting talked about in the media. So just calm down on it a little bit. Just
amen.
I will say that Adam Silver does seem a lot like some of these Pentagon officials that have come out and said, nothing to see here. Don't worry about the NBA ratings. It's totally fine because, some stuff's happening on TikTok and some other places. And so if people don't watch the games as much, that's not a big deal. And I'm a little skeptical of that. I think that you do have to pay attention to this because this all snuck up on Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball went through years of the same thing where it's like, look at gay revenue, look at we're fine, everything's fine. And then all of a sudden it wasn't anymore. And they had to make major structural changes to the game itself to try to get that trend moving in the right direction.
But also, like, what's the end, like, bad trend? Like, how does this relate to you as a fan? Which is, I think, Hayes' point, and that's, like, really key here, is, like, what's the bad result here? That Jalen Green goes from making $40 million a year to $25 million a year? Like, the end result here, we should care about, as NBA fans, we should care about things that affect fans. Prices in the stadium. Shout out Matt Ishbia for putting out the value deal on concessions this week. We should care about TV availability, the quality of league pass. We should care about the quality of the games. That's why we're advocating for less of them, so we get better games on the TV when we watch. I sound so old now. On the TVs, when we watch the games, we should have better games. we should worry about that. Let marketing officials and ESPN concern themselves with the ratings. You as an NBA fan, you're going to watch anyway. Let's care about the things that make the game great.
And I think also like NBA League Pass has grown substantially since like over the last 18 months. And I think a lot of times now, like people aren't necessarily watching games live as much, like especially with as many games on. Me and Matt have talked about that several times. Like why are there 15 games on a Thursday night and no games on Wednesday? Like things like that. But I think people are going back and catching up on games after the fact now. And I think that plays a part into it as well.
Just flipping through TikTok. I blame LaMelo Ball.
He's exciting. He brings people to the screen. I don't blame LaMelo Ball for that. What I do think is interesting, though, and you sort of hit on this with the league pass discussion, I don't really buy into the three-point shot or the quality of the commentary. I don't really buy into those arguments as like chasing fans away and reducing the ratings. What I do buy is that many years ago, the NBA got into bed with regional sports networks and that are on cable for a lot of the local broadcasting. And that has, I mean, you're already seeing some teams turn away from that model now and back towards more traditional, like open broadcast airwaves networks. But I think that is a legitimate concern for the NBA that you know, some teams made this deal like, hey, give us a bag of cash and we'll put these games on your networks. And fans have decided like there are other ways to go watch the game. I'm gonna do that instead of like actually tuning in.
Go get Amazon Prime would be my recommendation for you, because things are about to change dramatically. Amazon's made several purchases of RSNs. Like there is a very clear pathway to Amazon Sports is going to be the home of every NBA game that's not on ESPN or NBC starting in the very near future.
Yeah. Well, and to me, that's the biggest reason you should care about ratings as a fan is that it's like really the only thing that moves these leagues to make changes, just like I talked about in Major League Baseball. It's what makes them move to make either the game better or the presentation better or the availability better.
But the problem is that everyone's like the ratings are down 48% since 2012, and they just signed an $11 billion media deal. Like you talk about the ratings being what moves them. No. The money is what moves them. And as long as the money's good, they're not going to change. Now, that might you're right that might change on the next deal, but we got some time before that happens.
All right. If you like what you heard today, subscribe to Locked On NBA wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube. Our ratings are great. Because of you. Thanks for making Locked On NBA your first listen. Thanks to Matt. Thanks to Hayes. Enjoy tonight's action. Be kind to each other. And we are going to see you right back here to wrap up the week on Locked On NBA.